Coming up on this week's show, a massive new NES game is on the way.
One of the Atari Jaguar's Holy Grails is coming back.
And we get nostalgic with this week's guest, Rose Tinted Spectrum.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our friends, our lovely sponsor, Bitmap Books. Now, if you enjoy our interview on this week's show, you need to check out Sinclair ZX Spectrum, a visual compendium, a real celebration of the Specky, obviously that British system that will go on to define an age of video gaming, and you can relive the glory days, starting with the early titles like The Hobbit and Hungry Horace, and of course all those famous Spectrum games, Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy, Jetpack, Lords of Midnight, Night Law, Head Over Heels are all in here as well, and spanning more than 304 pages. And honestly, the graphics just come to life in this gorgeous book. You can check it out in the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our friends at PCBWay. Now, you know about PCBWay. They offer fully featured custom PCB prototyping, low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and if you're looking for services like 3D printing and injection molding, they've got you covered. And of course, I'm sure you know what big supporters of the retro community they are. Check out the shared project section of their website and also get an instant quote for yours right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 465, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for our first show of February. Thought everyone sounded a little bit happier this week. January's out the way.
Everybody's got paid.
Yeah, first payday of the year that we probably spent on
Things were getting tight, weren't they? Yeah.
Paying off all those debts from Christmas.
You get paid early for Christmas and then everybody goes and has to get presents and parties and then you're like, oh God.
You can just feel the mood lift though, can't you, when we get past that first month of the year. And obviously Valentine's Day on the way, and then it won't be long till summer's here and we're all out at expos and events again this year. So lots to look forward to. And today though, you know, because this podcast, we like to cover loads of different aspects of retro gaming and technology. You often get developers on, you know, with artists, musicians, people that run companies, magazine editors. And we love talking to YouTubers as well, because I think there is something about YouTubers just seem to have really good storytelling.
I think YouTube's taken over my viewing. You know, I used to watch series and stuff, but now just watch long things on YouTube and Patreon as well, which is quite good because you often get like full versions of the YouTubers' content.
And I always look forward to doing these episodes because today we're going to be joined by someone who I was actually introduced to through one of our patrons' hangouts. I think it was Ashley, one of our patrons who's been on the show a couple of times. He was on your quiz team over Christmas, Ravi, which you might want to block that out of your memory, but he was.
Oh, no, we did much better this year with Ashley, you know, helping me, yeah.
Still came last, just saying. But, yeah, it's such a good channel. Rose Tinted Spectrum. Now, it's interesting because I was introduced to his channel through watching his, he does these commentary videos where he basically looks back at old episodes of TV shows like Bad Influence and GamesMaster, and he does this like really witty commentary over the top of them. Kind of like, you know, if you ever watched like Charlie Brooker's Screen Wipe, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of poking fun affectionately at these shows that we all grew up watching. And it's also quite a nice way to basically condense these series down into like a 45-minute chunk and just get like the highlights of them. So, you know, if you haven't got time to watch them
they're
before.
kind of uniquely British as well.
Yeah.
Like, especially GamesMaster has that kind of cheeky, tongue-in-cheek humour. And, you know, for an international audience, watching the whole set of GamesMaster is, like you said, going to take a really long time. So it's good to have someone kind of guide you through it.
Yeah, and his channel covers, I mean, he started being a pure gaming channel about 5-6 years ago, but now he's spread out a bit more. He also dabbles in TV and film as well, because you were watching him actually, weren't you, a few months ago, Joe? He really unlocked a hidden memory from deep inside your consciousness.
I did. I won't spoil what it was, but I came across Dave about 3-4 months ago, and he covers a lot of the Spectrum stuff, which is before my time. But like you say, a lot of that 90s and late 80s, like British TV stuff and children's British TV shows, you know, which are, you know, retro and on the same kind of like, they're in the same house, if you will, of what we cover and stuff. And it just like opened up so many memories, and you're like, oh my God, I haven't thought of that in 30 years. And I didn't think anybody in the entire world had ever seen that or knew it existed, which I really, really enjoy about his channel. And then obviously talking to him about it and stuff was just fantastic.
You said a line in the interview. You went, I was looking at your channel. I thought, oh my God, I remember that. That could actually be the tagline for his channel, I think. So load of nostalgia in this interview because he grew up in Blackpool in the early days. We talk about the arcades as well, and obviously being a Spectrum fan and budget games too. So just a nice laid-back interview this week on the second half of the show with someone who we are loving on YouTube at the moment. Dave from Rose Tinted Spectrum will be this week's special guest on the show in around half an hour from now. But if you are a regular listener, you know the way the podcast works. First half is when us nerds get together and kind of talk about what's been making our timelines, the news from over the last 7 days, and also the stories that some of our patrons have put in our Discord as well. So we do have a little channel in Discord. If you ever want to, if you spot something and you think the guys might enjoy talking about that, feel free to pop it in there, and hopefully it'll make the news in a future week. But this story has been absolutely everywhere. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking a bit about YouTube on this week's podcast. But if we're going to, retro gaming YouTubers, they do not come much bigger than James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd.
He's pretty big, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. We've had him previously on the show as well, and he did talk a bit about his video game on that interview. But I do remember when his first video game came out, and it was like a YouTuber making a video game. But it really made sense because, in his channel, he's so critical about stuff that he's going to learn, and he's going to kind of, know what's good and bad. He's got a good gaming history. And I actually had a copy of that on the Wii U. And I thought it was a really decent platformer.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the AVGN games. I played them, not Christmas just gone, the one before on Xbox Series X, because they were on my wish list, and they just randomly came on, on sale. So I bought them both, and they are, they're essentially Mega Man games, aren't they? Yeah. But obviously set in the kind of AVGN universe, if you will. And he fights a lot of like classic terrible game bosses and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed the second one because it had like a Super Mario World, like kind of like world map and stuff like that, and just really, really, really enjoyed them, and actually tried to find myself becoming a bit of a completionist on both of those games. But the reason we're talking about these games is they have just announced a new one, which is called the Angry Video Game Nerd 8-Bit. So it's not called number 3, even though it is the third one. And from the looks of the trailer, which looks absolutely fantastic, it looks like it is just the next one in the game. Very much the same of what we've seen before, Mega Man style NES game. But what's really cool about it is this one will actually come out on the Nintendo, on the NES, and will run on NES, as well as coming out on all the other systems.
He had a release which was 1 and 2 deluxe as well. Yeah. So it's like a double pack of those kind of, done up a bit with some extra stuff in there. But this is the follow-up to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. No news on the release date, just 2025 in quarter 2. So, over the summer, I imagine. And it's being developed by Megacat Studios, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, great developer to have on board.
I think they did the other 2. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I imagine they did. But the physical release is coming out through limited run games for the physical NES version of it, which will play on original hardware, which I think...
That's the title 8-bit, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Which is great, because obviously the other 2 games are, they're modern retro, they're meant to look 8-bit, etc. But it's great that they are actually putting this one on an 8-bit system. But it feels like, I'm surprised it hadn't already been done, to be honest. Like, I'm surprised they didn't already do this before. Obviously they had to tone down some of the graphics and stuff like that because of, like you say, Ravi, you've played the other ones, and they are way better than an 8-bit game. Modern retro is.
They're closer to Broforce or something like that, just in effects.
Shovel Knight, etc. Yeah. Whereas it looks like they've got a lot going on this one still. The colours, the graphics.
It's got that colour palette, hasn't it? Yeah. It's been reduced, Some of the backgrounds aren't massively as big as they'd be, but it's got a really nice look, and obviously it's got all those modern techniques and tricks that have been put into stuff. I'm just looking at this Steam page at the moment, and it's got lots of screenshots of it.
I think one thing I love as well, which you actually pointed out, is obviously he's got a lot of like knowledge of these games and stuff, and something as simple as the actual cartridge, the label on the cartridge has the purple outline on the label, like so many of the Capcom NES games did. I think that's a really good touch. Like it
would be designed to be like an NES game and like not a modern kind of take on it.
Yeah.
You know, having those kind of classic features in there as well as, you know, part of his whole character. So
yeah. No, I'm really looking forward to this one. I think it will actually be a day one purchase for me on the Xbox or PS5, of course.
I was going to say which platforms. I mean, it's on the modern platforms: Switch, Xbox, PS5, Steam.
Well. Yeah,
but yeah, I'm just imagining Joe there, like, you know, with his NES wired up to his CRT, playing on his Power Glove with his shell suit on.
No, I'll do my classic thing of getting it on a modern system. I'm sure I will. But actually, I wonder if the cartridge will be region free for.
Because most of them are these days, I think.
Yeah, I imagine they will be. I mean, I'll have a little look, see how much it is. But I'm sure I'll probably end up buying it on a Xbox or PlayStation, like I always do.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that. As you said, no release date as yet, but some point in the next 5 months or so. So if you want to check out the trailer, I'll put that in this week's show notes. Now, this next product could be the answer to all of our prayers, because do you find, you know, it's a constant nightmare. And I think if a qualified electrician ever looked around the back of my TV or in my retro gaming room, they might have a bit of a heart attack looking at the complete lack of electrical safety. I'm talking extension leads, sometimes daisy chained a couple of times to power normal retro systems, or fused, though, of course, and don't have them all on at the same time, so figure I'm probably all right.
And then all the dust kind of piling up on top of your extension leads as well.
I like to hoover them now.
Dog hair.
Yeah, definitely dog hair. But that's a constant problem, particularly if you've got quite a few systems and you want to have them set up. Just trying to, you know, houses don't have the necessary power outlets for all of the gadgets that we have today. So extension leads are, you know, kind of something that we don't like to have, but a bit of a necessity really these days. But this is a new device called the Retro Tap that the same will power up to 10 retro consoles from one power block.
Yeah, this looks absolutely bonkers. It says up to 10, but then he's just released a list of compatible ones that are far beyond 10 as well. So, you know, it depends on the end that you get on it and the kind of adapter. But the main thing is it's, you know, a modern PSU.
Yeah.
It's not going to have all the problems that you have with some of these older ones. I remember I used to have some that if you kick them, the whole machine would crash or you caught it somehow. Another thing is as well, the Sega Tower of Power can be run off one power supply. Yeah. So you remember you had all those separate elements in there. You had like the Mega Drive, the Mega CD, 32X as well. All of those just off one PSU, which is absolutely amazing. I think it's really smart. There's some systems that it's not compatible with. You know, this is a 9-volt DC as well. But like you can't plug it into your Mister or your FrameMeister or anything like that. But it also does the NEC PC Turbo Duo. There's a Atari Jaguar as well, Jaguar CD, the Game Gear. You know, it's just the list goes on here. You've got a lot of Nintendo systems, but it's great to see Atari systems in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about these, I think it seems to be the systems that use those kind of barrel plugs.
Yes, yeah,
it works with by the looks of it. Yeah, so stuff like, you know, the Amiga, for example, with its kind of weird power connector. Probably not something. I mean, I'm sure you could make some kind of adapter.
Maybe there'll be adapters that come out in the future later on for it. Yeah.
It seems interesting. It's Kaitor Industries is the person who's behind this, and it's just a couple of tweets at the moment, kind of showing some images and also basically the features of this: clean power delivery, wire up to 10 consoles. You can run 4 to 6 of them at the same time. It's got resettable fuses in there as well, and a medical grade power supply with less than a 50% ripple, apparently.
He's done some good stuff before. So he's done like a Turbo Express PC Engine, HUCard connector, and he's done stuff like some like little adapters for the retro tink and stuff like that, because also this works with an upscaler as well. So the retro scaler is supported on this power supply, which I think is quite cool.
That's one good thing about, like, you know, a lot of modern devices now being USB powered. You know, you get a few of them plugs with like USB ports on, it makes life a lot easier. But for the retro stuff, I mean, what's it like in your retro room, Joe? Is it a bit spaghetti junction behind your telly?
Yeah, just a bit. You know what? I was testing some consoles earlier this week, and yeah, behind my TV is absolutely awful at the moment. Like, power supplies just everywhere, and then obviously like AV cables and HDMI cables everywhere as well. And I find this really interesting because obviously over, like, you know, the last 15, 20 years, you know, we've seen so many different like HDMI devices and upscalers and, you know, units, you know, to extensions and all this kind of stuff. You very rarely, or I can't think off the top of my head, somebody who's done this before, where it's like, you know, like you say, Dan, solves the whole daisy chaining, like extension cords and stuff, which I don't actually do. You know, I'm one of them, you know, got told once as a kid, you can blow your house up kind of thing. So this is really interesting to see. But I think I'd still be a bit worried about using it. Like, I feel
if you choose the correct polarity, basically there's like two options in there as well. But, you know, I'm sure they'll have like good instructions on it and stuff. And I wouldn't be as worried using this as one of those old power supplies, because I know it's
30, 40-year-old power supplies.
Yeah, that's
modern
true.
components, you know. And I'm thinking, you know, this is a 9-volt. Maybe they'll do a 12-volt one in the future for like other systems and stuff, because this is just of that era, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, like I said, it's just a few tweets. So if you want to get a look at it, no word on pricing or release date that we can see so far. But yeah, definitely does solve a problem. So if you want to check that out, I'll put that in this week's show notes too. Now, you know, we were talking before when you mentioned the AVGN game, that it is nice to see it coming out on retro consoles this time. And another game that is getting ported back to the old systems, the Xbox 360 Run and Gunner Heavy Recoil is getting a port back to the Sega Mega Drive.
This one I found quite interesting. I'd never heard of this, so I missed this one. It originally came out on the 360 in 2012 as part of Xbox Arcade, which is retro now.
Yeah, which also had loads of... It kind of helped spark the indie scene, and it had loads of interest, actually. It was a really good incentive, Xbox Arcade.
Yeah, I used to really enjoy the Xbox Arcade, especially when I first got my Xbox 360 when I was kind of like 18 years old and didn't have a lot of money. It was nice to buy like these games for like £3, you know, and play them. And
there were some good arcade conversions on there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this Heavy Recoil was then ported to the Ouya, however you want to say it.
Ouya.
Dan's favourite console.
Dan's favourite console.
Dan got heavily invested in the Ouya and then heavily disappointed.
As well as Windows. But this is pretty cool to see. So the creator of this game, who is, I think his name is it Mikhail or Michael? I'm not too sure the way it's spelled, but Tillander.
Wide Pixel Games.
Yeah, he's part of Wide Pixel Games, and he tweeted about a year or two ago saying it was coming to the Sega Mega Drive. You know, his original game, he's going to port it to the Sega Mega Drive. But then it was only this last week he's tweeted about it again, saying that the Kickstarter is coming like soon, and there is a Kickstarter page there now, you know, waiting for the launch of it, which is really cool. But have you guys checked this game out? Have you had a look at it? Because it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, again, I'm just going to say the reference I always say. It reminds me of Cyborg Justice, but it's got a bit of a Turrican feel to it as well, the way that you're, you know, pointing the gun.
Yes.
But the parallax is nice on it, and I think the palette matches the Mega Drive exactly.
Yeah, I think it definitely captures the essence of the Mega Drive really well. I quite like your characters, how they've got a bit of a Vector Man look to them as well, with those kind of like
pre-rendered style.
Yeah, pre-rendered, you know, graphics, Donkey Kong kind of style in the 16-bit kind of like world. I really
it seems to be a real theme again recently, that, doesn't it? I think we've mentioned that like the last 3 or 4 episodes. Yeah, there's something coming along like that.
Silicon graphics definitely seem to be making a comeback at the moment, that kind of style.
I imagine probably not using £35,000 Silicon graphics workstations.
No, probably not, no. But yeah, any day now, I imagine this is actually going to get announced on Kickstarter, and I'm sure we'll probably see. I predict a physical release of it because of for the Mega Drive.
You know what? It actually really reminds me of like the RoboCop games or Lethal Weapon on the Amiga as well.
Oh,
it's got that kind of feel.
Yeah, it does have that kind of feel. It's funny because a lot of people reference it to the Contra games.
Yeah.
Whereas the creator says, no, it wasn't meant to be a Contra game. It was actually more inspired by, Russian Attack and, the games that we've just been mentioning and stuff. Contra did come to my mind straight away, but from talking to you guys, as soon as you said Turrican, I was like, oh yeah, I can see that now. But yeah, one to keep an eye out for. This looks really cool.
I can see when you mentioned Lethal Weapon there, the bounciness of it.
Yeah,
that's
what I meant. Yeah,
yeah.
Kind of. And the way that the screen draws as well, that you kind of, it's quite fast. How you're going across,
I did love that game, but it's so hard.
Now you've pointed out the bounciness and the speed of it. It reminds me of RoboCop versus Terminator and the RoboCop games, like you've just said, Ravi.
Yeah, so another strong start to the year in terms of retro releases. More coming from the Mega Drive, so we'll keep an eye on that. Like I said, the Kickstarter pages are there now, so if you want to get notified on launch, I'll put that in the show notes too. Now, this headline's been everywhere, and I've seen a few people disputing this, so we'll see where we get to with this. And we were actually talking about this on the Patrons Hangout that we just did on Sunday evening, because it's been all over, like, Tom's Hardware, places like that Sony is ending production of recordable Blu-rays. Now, the story's changed a bit because the initial story, before they updated it, said that Sony are discontinuing Blu-ray production and also mini DV cassettes and mini discs next month.
Which is just mad because I collect mini discs and I'm like, what, Sony are still producing them?
Yeah, that was more of the shock. And
brand
mini
new
DV
ones, yeah. I didn't even know that. Like, mini disc was a great kind of lost format. I still use it today. I still think it's great to have your kind of collections on there. But mini DV as well was kind of when video was between analog and digital, and you had like a firewire cable, and I remember you'd still have to capture the like mini DV in in a digital way, but you'd have to do it in real time. So you'd have to get your firewire, hook it up to your video camera. That would then control it to rewind, and then you'd go to the very beginning and then start the capture process. Later on, I think they had ways of digitally transferring the mini DV over. But just hearing those two formats mentioned in like 2025, I'm like, what is going on? Like Blu-ray, recordable Blu-ray discs. I guess there's not many people with Blu-ray burners. Or many people doing that now. Is this for your pirate Blu-ray movies that you sell on the street corner?
Randomly, I had to make a Blu-ray a few years ago. That was the only reason I bought a burner. I think it was quite cheap. It was about £60 off Amazon. And it's the only time I've ever used it to burn a Blu-ray disc. I mean, because Blu-ray drives are backwards compatible, I actually do use my Blu-ray burner in my PC quite regularly to burn CDRs.
Yeah, and DVDs
for my old
and
systems.
stuff. Like I only ever had a Blu-ray drive in my PC, but it was just a reader.
Yeah.
There was no burning capability in there.
It's weird though.
It's not like they've dropped UHD Blu-ray or like, one of these formats that's really pushing stuff, out the disc format. I think that's one of the best, because you can get the high-end movies on there as well that, sometimes downloading it's not as high-end as that
Well, when do you guys buy movies on Blu-ray?
I bought a couple of months ago. So I finally bought a modern TV. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I bought a big 65-inch smart TV about 4 or 5 months ago.
When your wife was out?
You know what? She encouraged it. We just popped into Curry's and I saw it and it was like, I can't remember how much it was, not loads, but, enough. Yeah. And she was like, oh, just buy it, just treat yourself. And then we couldn't fit it in the car. Like it was a right palaver. But I, started playing my PS5 on it. I got a PS5 around the same time as well. And I remember being like, oh my God, I was playing The Last of Us and I was like, it looks like I could step into the game.
Yeah.
And then I watched, what did I watch? I watched Aliens on Disney Plus. And I was like, this looks fantastic. And I just started like Aliens is like probably, it depends what day you ask me, my favorite film of all time, that or Terminator, or Terminator 2. And I, like, in the hype of my new TV, bought a HD 4K Blu-ray.
Good on you, Joe,
Aliens.
because that streaming is totally different quality.
Yeah. And
Seeing
I was
it
like,
after this,
maybe this could be a new thing, like, kind of thing. Like, you know, maybe I could, you know, get into buying physical media again, all my old favorite films. And I started making like a wish list of like the Terminator and Highlander and all these like great 80s films. And then I was just like, oh, you know what, this is going to be really expensive and I haven't got any room for it. So I have Aliens on 4K Blu-ray. Like,
It looks beautiful though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks stunning. And I was exactly the same. Criterion start releasing lots of silent movies, but they've also released stuff that isn't out there. In 4K Blu-ray, there's like, you know, Buster Keaton collection in there, and their 100-year-old comedy there, and just seeing that in Blu-ray 4K, it's like wow, and it's taken off the original film, so you know they've scanned it, and that's done with chemicals, so it's you know, they can get it to like nearly 4K or like close to what your eye can see. Basically, it's pretty crazy, but they're like 60, 70 quid a DVD or something. So I've only got like 4.
That's the thing. I mean, it's just for movie collectors really now, isn't it? Physical format. I think generally most people are happy with just whatever's on Netflix. I generally buy, I mean, you know, my favourite films I've bought on Ultra HD Blu-rays, you know, like Terminator 1 and 2, Ghostbusters, Flight of the Navigator, which I do love.
I thought you'd have them on HD DVD, Dan.
I do actually still have a rather substantial collection of HD DVD. I have talked about that on the podcast before. That I go back to the early days of Blu-ray. I did back the wrong horse. I remember thinking no one's going to want to buy something called Blu-ray. That just sounds so weird.
Who's Ray and why is he blue?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I thought HD DVD, everyone's going to understand the name. It's a high definition DVD. Surely that's going to take off. So I bought one of those drives for my Xbox 360, and I think they announced they're discontinuing it about a month later. Did mean I could pick the HD DVDs up for about 25 pence after that in CEX. So there was a stage when they're actually cheaper than DVDs. So I've still got quite a big collection of them. But yeah, I've got a load of Blu-rays as well. Got to admit, I don't actually dig them out all that often, but occasionally, you know, if I want to watch something really nice quality, I'll go and get them. But so when I did read this story, the first thing I thought was, well, what does that mean for video games? Because obviously the modern consoles, if you buy a game on physical, they use Blu-ray discs, which made me think, oh God, does that mean, you know, which probably will happen, let's be honest, PlayStation 6 probably won't have an optical drive on there. I was actually quite surprised and pleased that the Switch 2 will have a cartridge slot on there. Obviously, it's got it for backwards compatibility. But actually, you delve a bit more into this story, and despite this being a headline everywhere that basically it's the end of physical media, it turns out this was an announcement just for the Japanese market, and it turns out all they're doing is ending writable Blu-ray discs. So they're still going to make them for commercial use.
And are they still producing mini discs?
Doesn't mention that anymore. I'm not sure. Yeah, I can't. I don't know when the last commercial mini disc release was. Yeah, I've got a feeling probably in the 90s. I think it was only about like a few albums released on it. I remember seeing Mariah Carey's album on mini disc and Dixon's once back in the mid 90s.
You've got to get that, Dan.
But yeah, I mean that's the headline really. And I have got some. I think I've got a pack of writable Blu-ray discs that have been on my shelf for like
keep
6
them.
years.
They'll become rare items in the future. Yeah.
Gathering dust. So I'm not sure. Obviously, they weren't selling enough to warrant making them anymore. But it does mean that don't panic if you read those stories about the end of physical media. I'm sure it's coming, but it's not quite there just yet. Now, speaking of something else that's coming out on physical, and a game that is definitely a bit of a holy grail for Atari Jaguar fans. And I promise I'm not just, hunting for Jaguar stories. It's a bit like the second week in a row.
We've been Jaguar heavy recently.
We have. Yeah. Just seems like there's a lot going on the Jaguar right now. But there is going to be, and this is something that happens quite regularly actually, they do reprints of classic cartridges. This one, though, is quite noteworthy because this is one of the most collectible Atari Jaguar games, and one that will definitely set you back a good few £100 if you want to get the original copy of it. And this is a game called Atari Karts. Are you guys familiar with this game?
I've heard you mention it before. That's how I'm familiar. But I haven't even looked at a video of it. I know there were a lot of karting games that came out at the time on clone systems. So remember, the Amiga CD32 had its own kind of karting titles. Virtual karting, I think that was what it was called. Yeah, and then there was a Street Racer as well. There was one of the famous kind of Mario Kart clones.
I was going to mention Street Racer because I think I've not played Atari Karts, but I know what it is. And I think it looks more like Street Racer than Mario Kart. Like, obviously, they're all off the hype of Mario Kart. They're all meant to be Mario Kart clones, but it's like, you start cloning other clone titles.
Yeah, clones of clones of clones.
Clones of clones, and that's where you get to Atari Karts. And you play as Bentley Bear.
Yes.
In this one. Well, he's the main character in this one. But wasn't
he the mascot at the time?
Yeah, he was the mascot of a few Atari games. And he was in Crystal Castles. But I think the main draw of Atari Karts that people talk about mostly these days is it's an incredibly rare, expensive Atari Jaguar game. I think, Dan, you've said before it can reach like £300-400 if it's boxed and in good condition and stuff on eBay.
I managed to get mine. I think I paid about 150, but I got it off a friend.
Yeah,
and this was going back ago. Yeah, going back a decade ago now.
Yeah,
so it's definitely, if you're collecting for the Jaguar, it's a game that everyone wants in their collection. I think because it came out reasonably late as well. I mean, it came out in America in 95. It came out over here in 96.
Wow.
So I mean, by 96, you can only really get Jaguars, I think, kind of like knockdown prices by then. No one really wanted them, when a PlayStations and N64 was on the horizon. So it meant that it didn't sell very well. Actually, in terms of gameplay, though, it's a pretty decent kind of Mario Kart / Street Racer clone. Kind of got those Mode 7 style graphics.
So this is a proper kart then.
Yep.
That it comes out in, and it's boxed. It's by this group called Songbird Productions. And,
that's it. We didn't mention that, but this is what's happening. So basically, it's getting a new limited edition reprint.
Yeah.
And they seem to be doing quite a few reprints as well. Interestingly, they've done one for the new one as well, which was the strange DVD system as well that came out, kind of a bit of a legacy item. They did a reprint of Tempest 3000 even, and that's like nearly $80. That reprint is. So it seems that these reprints coming out are still actually quite expensive. But I don't know how much this Atari Kart's going to be. But stuff like Towers 2 Enhanced is nearly $100. So I can still imagine it's going to be quite a pricey title, but this takes the price down a bit to a kind of realistic thing, and you get the pristine box and all of that. I know it's not the original, but at least you get to play it.
Well, at the time of recording, I mean, pre-orders for this go up on the 30th of January. So by the time the podcast comes out, it should be up on Songbird Productions' website. Time recording notes are not listed on there at the moment, but kind of going through their other titles, they generally kind of range from $79 up to about $120, $130.
Yeah, for like Soccer Kid or like Total Carnage or something like that.
Yes, I imagine. I mean, the thing is, they're not going to be selling millions of these.
I can imagine the Jaguar kart as well is a really weird shaped thing. And quite kind of limited run of prints, I can imagine.
I wonder how they do that, actually. Yeah, because are they making, I wonder if they've got molds for new ones or whether they're kind of repurposing old shells from old games. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, they've got like transparent ones as well.
Yeah.
For Protector, Resurgence, and a few other games like that.
Or they've got a DeLorean and just, go back and raid their factory.
They found a box full of empty carts. Yeah.
But they're showing the Jaguar a bit of love at the moment. I mean, obviously there's the Atari Jaguar, Atari Karts reproduction that is due out. Pre-orders available this week. And there's 2 more print runs for a couple of homebrew games as well, Wormhole 2000 and Spidex as well, which a couple of indie titles that came out in the last few years. Spidex is a Jaguar port of the Vectrex game that was out in 2019. So, I think...
Building up the collection, Yeah.
It definitely is. And it's, you can get, if you really want to play Atari Karts, obviously the ROMs are available to play in emulation. It's in Atari 50 as well, the Atari 50 collection, if you want an easier way of playing it. But I think, just the fact that if you've got an Atari Jaguar and you want to go for a complete collection, I know there's always that kind of, does it count? I mean, in my opinion, if it looks identical to the original, they normally have a little line on the packaging somewhere, don't they, saying it's a reproduction, to stop people trying to sell them on eBay as the original. Yeah. Which I think makes sense. But yeah, and I know we've had this kind of conversation before, Joe, your mate Jason, who collects for the Mega Drive, like, do new games still count? Do reproductions count as towards original collections? In my mind, I think it's fine. But I know there will be people that disagree.
Yeah.
And like the Atari 50 collection at the moment is like very cheap online indeed, like under a £5 in some places.
Yeah, I can't imagine they're going to be selling, any more than a handful of these, so it makes sense that it will be quite expensive. But if you want to get a hold of those, pre-orders should be available by the time this podcast comes out, so I'll link it up. And of course, all the rest of the stories, you don't have to Google around. I save you the job every week. Just click through to the show notes section on your podcast app or head to the website, theretrohour.com. Now, we did have our brilliant first patrons hangout of 2025 on Sunday evening. Like I said, we talked about, all kinds of stuff in there as well, including we were chatting for a bit about the that discontinuation of Blu-ray. Oh, it's just such a good laugh, isn't it? We got a few new faces on there as well, didn't we, this week, Ravi?
Yeah, I was just looking at everybody there and I was thinking, what an international bunch we have there. We had listeners from the Netherlands and from Scandinavia.
Australia.
Yeah, Australia. Canada. Yeah, America. The UK as well. Right mix. Like, all chatting about one kind of shared subject and what they love, and also sharing tips and kind of tricks as well, which is really nice to see. And thanks to everybody that came and kind of showed us their stuff. It's really good fun.
Yeah, we've said it before. It's kind of like a virtual users group, really, we like to think of it. But yeah, it's just a great excuse to get together and geek out for a couple of hours on a Sunday evening once a month. And if you did miss this month's hang up, we've got another one coming up at the end of February. So if you join us on Patreon now, you'll get an invite to that. And also, we're going to be releasing another episode of our bonus podcast just for gold members and above, the Retro Hour After Hours. The latest episode was an interesting one. Our top 5 tech innovations and gaming innovations of the last 30 years.
Sometimes we end up disagreeing or arguing a little bit on these things.
They're the best ones, aren't they?
They are the best ones. But it was really interesting because we all came at it from a different angle. I went mostly gaming, and then Dan went very much tech, and then Ravi kind of sat in the middle with it. He went a bit gaming, a bit tech. We cheated a little bit. We went back to 1994 because we recorded it literally the first week of January.
And 2025 hasn't happened really yet.
Yeah. But no, it was a really, really good one. And I'm really looking forward to what we come up with for the next few, to be honest.
I'm glad we set that restriction so we weren't the printing press. Electricity.
Yeah, so it was a really interesting chat. And if you back us on Patreon now as a gold member or above, you will unlock 46 episodes.
That's a lot.
Yeah, of exclusive after hours listening. And you get the normal podcast ad free. We give you an extra 10-15 minutes of news stories as well on every show, just for the patrons, because we chop all the adverts out. And also, I'll try and get it out a bit early if I can for the patrons. So if you want to join our wonderful community, all the details are on the website right now at theretrohour.com. Okay, well, thank you for checking out the news on this week's podcast. We'll have more for you, of course, on next Friday's show. In the meantime, like I said, if you want to join our Discord server, chatting away all throughout the week on there, there's a link on our website. You can click through to it. And also, a little reminder as well, if you do listen on any platform that allows you to leave a review. So we appreciate not everyone can join us on Patreon. That is another way that you can really help out the podcast. Those little 5-star reviews and nice comments always helps us get in front of new people. Been doing quite well in the charts actually recently, haven't we? So
and thanks for everybody that's been sharing and chatting about us on all the different platforms as well. We've had some really nice chat in Blue Sky as well. We've had quite a lot on Instagram, and it's just good to see people saying, "Oh, check this episode out." If someone's talking about a subject, it's great.
Yeah, it all really helps. So thank you very much for doing that. And if you do get a chance this weekend to leave us a little review, much appreciated. Right, then next, a really nostalgic chat with this week's special guest, Rose Tinted Spectrum. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And today, it is someone who I've been watching, kind of binge watching on YouTube over the last few months, after someone in our patrons community suggested his incredible YouTube channel, and I've been hooked on it ever since. So I thought we'd get him on for a bit of a nostalgic chat. And this is Dave from the wonderful YouTube channel, Rose Tinted Spectrum. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you taking some time to hopefully do some geeking out with us over the next hour or so. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about your channel, which is just incredible. Real, like, you know, we often cover nostalgia on this podcast, obviously being a retro gaming show.
Yeah.
But your channel, just like, you know, there's so many things that you cover that really just takes me back and makes me think, God, I've forgotten about that. So we'll definitely hop into that in just a minute. But we also like to get a bit of background on our guests. I mean, you know, let's find out a bit about your gaming history. Where did it kind of all start for you? Do you remember like your first ever gaming experience? What got you into it?
Yeah, I do actually. It's quite a vivid memory, and probably one of my earliest memories now that I think about it. Obviously, we were just talking before the podcast about my mum and dad owning a B&B in Blackpool. Obviously, that meant they were extremely busy. And I have vivid memories of just wandering around this massive building that I probably didn't quite understand was my actual house at the time, because there were so many people staying there. But they had a tabletop Space Invaders, which they ridiculously threw away when they sold the B&B.
Oh, wow. But
I specifically remember playing that, not quite understanding what it was that I was supposed to do, and that led them to getting me a ZX Spectrum when I was about 5. I was very young. And that Christmas, it's weird, I can only really remember 2 Christmases. The first one was the one when I got my ZX Spectrum. The other one was when I got my Super Nintendo. So
right.
Obviously left an impression on those 2 things.
Nice. And you mentioned there the B&B in Blackpool. Obviously moved away when you were 7. Do you remember much of the arcade scene?
Yes.
In Blackpool? What was that like growing up around them?
So weirdly, in Blackpool, I don't think I really visited them a lot, but what we did do every year, and this went on until I was about 16, we used to go down to Devon on caravanning holidays, and they had so many arcade machines there. It almost feels like they were conning me out of it, because I probably didn't realize how many there were in Blackpool at the time. So the campsite had a ton. I honestly don't know how they kept it going, because there was so many different arcade machines in there. And I've got, again, quite vivid memories of probably the last time that I was there, and they had the Die Hard reskin of Dynamite Decker.
Yeah.
The Tekken 3. Yeah. They had Puzzle Bobble. They had the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles and the Simpsons game. They had so much stuff in this tiny little, it was like adjacent to the pub. So the parents would obviously just go in the pub and they would just send the children in with change, and it would just be full of children running around in this amazing arcade. So even though I grew up in Blackpool, my main memories of the arcade were anywhere but Blackpool, strangely enough.
Do you always remember as well when you look back on those memories? Because I'm very nostalgic for those memories as well, of going to like Nuki and stuff, and the exact same thing. And when you look back, you actually remember that your parents just gave you like a bag of crisps and a Panda Pop for your dinner as well. And you didn't care. You had a $5 burning a hole in your pocket. Yeah.
I mean, that kept your sugar levels high enough to take in all of the visuals when you went to the arcade. That's all you needed.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some fantastic games there, Tekken 3, Dynamite Decker Arcade, Die Hard Arcade, a very rare one. Were these the kind of like go-to ones for you, or was there any standout arcade machines which were like the main ones for you?
I think at the time, because of my age, the ones that I tended to gravitate towards were probably the licensed Capcom, the 4-player fighting games. I always remember the Simpsons one in particular. I felt so shortchanged with this, but there was a load of kids playing it. I think they were playing it 4-player, and they must have put £1,000 into that Simpsons machine, because I don't know if you've played that game recently, but my God, does everything take a million hits to kill? And they'd go to the Mr. Burns fight, which I'd obviously never seen before, and all of them had run out of money. So I went in afterwards, put my quid in or however much it cost. I hit him twice and that was game over and there was no loop. So I did get to see the ending. Unfortunately, I didn't do any of the fun stuff that led up to that ending. So
my
goodness. I love that game. That was the only arcade I could ever get my mum on. Obviously, she'd always have to be Marge. You know, my brother and I and my dad would go on as well. Yeah, so great memories of playing the Simpsons arcade. It was a shame it never got like I think the only system it got a home port onto randomly, wasn't it? Like the Commodore 64 or something got a port of it.
Yeah, it did get actually a pretty good C64 port as well. Considering the hardware limitations, it did get ported to the Xbox 360 Live Arcade way after the fact. And I think the reviews at the time were obviously quite scathing, I guess is the best way to put it, because on the face of it, it is just a game that was kind of designed for you to just keep pumping money into it unless you practiced. And I've got to be honest, like going back to stuff like the X-Men was another one that I absolutely loved. And going back to X-Men feels so much more, and the Turtles as well, it feels so much more doable than that Simpsons game. I don't know what it is about the Simpsons one, but all of the bosses take far too long to get through. So maybe they had a point. I'm not sure.
I think it's just Bart Simpson was like the coolest thing in the world when you're like a 10-year-old kid, wasn't he, back then? So anything with the Simpsons on.
Absolutely.
I mean, talking about your home life there, I mean, you mentioned the Spectrum there. What are some of your strongest memories about your Spectrum then, apart from that Christmas? What do you remember doing on it, and any titles that stood out for you and in those long summer holidays?
Yeah. So you'll probably tell from 90% of the reviews on my channel, most of the games I got were budget games that not many people would have heard of, because my parents didn't really equate the amount something cost with the quality. And to be fair, that wasn't always true, but in the vast majority of cases it was for the Spectrum. But a neighbor was leaving for university and he left me a crate, like it was a literal enormous crate. It must have been like a 32-litre crate full of Spectrum games. And some of them didn't have cases. Some of them had no instructions. It was just a tape, or it was recorded from somewhere. And that must have lasted me 2 to 3 years, I would say, just going through them, trying to understand what these games were. And a lot of the games I review on the channel are actually ones that were in that box that at the time I probably didn't have the instructions for. So it was just a case of loading them up and even just working out the buttons. Let's be honest, that was an ordeal in itself for a lot of Spectrum games. So to revisit them now and have obviously the internet available for all of this information, it's just, I don't know, it's a nice way to go back and experience something that I can vividly remember from when I was 7 or 8 years old and actually experience it how it was supposed to be experienced.
Did you ever try much programming on the Specky, or was it simply a gaming system for you?
Yeah, I was probably too young to really understand that was even a thing you could do up until my cousin also had one. He was a couple of years older, and he had this programming book, which he'd I'd asked for it or he'd lent it to me, and I typed one thing out. It was supposed to be an animation, a bit like Independence Day, where a UFO came across and it blew up a building. But I must have typed something wrong in after 3 hours of typing, and it was just this garbled mess that went across the screen, and it fired something down to the middle, and then instead of it exploding, I think it just came up with an error message, and then everything I'd written was just wiped. So I didn't bother doing any more after that.
Oh, that was heartbreaking. I remember trying to do them out of magazines, the type-in listings. And it was the same because, God, some of these, they could span over several issues. Yeah. And you made one little mistake, one character somewhere in like a 3,000-word program, and it had ruined the whole thing. So I know it was a learning process, but often quite frustrating. Yeah. So did any of your mates have computers or consoles back then? And was it much of like a local scene at your school or anything like that?
There really wasn't. I always felt like a bit of an outcast for liking games, weirdly enough, or just computers in general, because I think 90% of the kids that I went to school with were just football. That's all they did. And football wasn't something I was particularly interested in at all, really. I don't think it was until I went to secondary school, maybe, when the SNES and Mega Drive and everything were a bit bigger in the UK. And that's when I started to notice a lot more people, certainly where I grew up, that were into games. And then by the time the PlayStation 1 came out, everyone seemed to be into them. But in terms of microcomputers, I knew people who had them and would play games, but never, I don't know, it was almost like there was a veil of shame amongst children that you weren't allowed to talk about how good they were, because that would make you a nerd or something. It was a strange time.
I think you might be right, because really until, it kind of felt like when the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo came out, it became a bit more credible then, but really when the PlayStation came out, that's when it became cool, didn't it, gaming? But
oh yeah, definitely. By the time the PlayStation came out, especially when things like Grand Theft Auto, etc., were being released, I remember kids that I specifically remember in one class, actually, I think it was science, I overheard a kid talking about how much he loved Grand Theft Auto, and it was a kid that had specifically ripped the piss out of me about 5 years previous for playing games. So I just thought, well, times have changed, haven't they?
So, at a glance, looking at your channel, obviously, big love for the Spectrum. You mentioned earlier that the 2 Christmases you remember are the Spectrum year and the Super Nintendo year. So, at a glance, I can see there's a lot of Spectrum stuff, and then it kind of jumps to the 90s, and there's some Super Nintendo bit, 16-bit stuff. Did you play the 8-bit consoles much? Did you have much time with the Master System or the NES, or did you kind of go straight from Spectrum to 16-bit?
So as far as my own computing history went, I went straight from the Spectrum to the SNES, which was such an enormous leap. It was beyond comprehension at the time. But my cousin, at the time I got a SNES, I think he got a Master System, so I had a lot of experience with that. Yeah. And I knew people who had Amigas, but they wouldn't let me touch them with my filthy, poor hands. And there was somebody I knew who also ended. Oh no, it was the Amiga kid. Of course, he had a Virtual Boy as well later on. So there was things that I got to experience throughout, and there was a lad. Strangely enough, he's actually now my boss at work. There was a kid that I grew up with, and he had a Mega Drive. So we used to do like a swap every summer, where I would give him my SNES and all my games, and he would do the same with his Mega Drive. So I got all of that experience. But it was the NES really that ended up convincing my parents to get me a SNES, because my sister's boyfriend at the time, they had a NES, and I'd played Super Mario in the arcade and not realizing that it was like a console thing. I just remembered really liking it, and I think I'd gone round maybe to stay at theirs when I was about 7 or 8, and they had a NES there, and I was pretty much non-stop addicted to playing Mario and Duck Hunt. So that Christmas I was begging my parents for a NES, and they must have already bought the SNES at this point, but they were trying to convince me that no, I was like, nope, it's not that I want, it's this one I want.
No. The cheaper one.
That's fantastic.
But obviously, thankfully, when the SNES did come out, I was overjoyed because it was just something new. But I didn't really understand what the SNES was at the time. I was too young to comprehend that it was like an upgraded Nintendo, really. So
that's fantastic.
They made the right choice.
Similar to me, I really wanted a Commodore 64 and actually ended up getting an Amiga 500, which, I'd read about the Amiga and I assumed, that's for, like, you mentioned one of your videos that you thought was for rich kids. Yeah. And I thought the same. I'm sure my parents got it on, like, credit cards are probably still paying off today. But yeah, it's like, just when you get surprised with something that you weren't expecting, it's like, I've got a picture of me with my eyes on stalks.
Yeah, I think it's funny. The Amiga rich kid thing is obviously just like a very personal experience story, but I love to make it a universal thing because it really, really annoys people. Yeah. I wasn't posh. I was like, I know. It's obviously, there was one kid I knew with an Amiga, and it's just one of those situations where if you only know one person who does something, you automatically just tar everyone with the same brush. So it's more of a comedic thing on my side, but I do enjoy the very defensive people that come in on the Amiga reviews.
Tarquin from your school with his Amiga.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, today, getting hold of games, I mean, you can go into Asda, with, there is a few high street retailers left, or, e-stores are a big thing. But back in the day, I don't know what your memories are of game shops. I mean, did you have a game shop that you remember, going for your Super Nintendo games or maybe your Specky games? What was your local game shop like?
I mean, I grew up, certainly when I had the SNES, it would have been when I was living in Carlisle, and Carlisle only had, well, I'll say this now and then someone's going to correct me later on, but I think they only had one independent shop in the middle of town. The other one was Electronics Boutique.
Yes.
And then eventually they got the other one, not Game, the other one that closed down. Game Station, that was it. They did end up getting a Game Station after they changed to Game, but I think the independent shop closed down. So I did used to get quite a few things from there, but I don't think I was really buying games myself until around the PS1, PS2 era. Yeah, that would have been when I would have had my first job. But I think by that time I was getting into PC gaming anyway, because it was magnitudes cheaper than buying console games. So
you didn't always have to buy them.
No, exactly. I think it tended to be Electronics Boutique that I got a lot of my stuff from, because they always had really good like 3 for £20 offers.
Yeah.
And because I'd got the PC later on, there was just such a wealth of retro stuff to play through for just pennies, really. So that's where I ended up getting into my PC gaming.
I did love walking into Electronics Boutique and seeing all those big box PC games on the shelf. It was proper Aladdin's cave.
Absolutely.
Was there any big disappointments you'd have? Like, obviously, you've covered some truly awful games like Count Duckula, but did any come to mind that maybe you played as a kid, or maybe games you always wanted to play and you played as an adult and you're just like, oh wow, okay, this is terrible?
Well, it's difficult to say, really. I think there's a lot of stuff because I don't really talk about the SNES that much. I think the SNES is kind of oversaturated in terms of YouTube, and I tend to just enjoy talking about things that nobody else is really talking about. But SNES-wise, I always remember I must have just been desperate for a new game. It didn't really matter what it was. I just needed something to play. And I seem to remember it was in like the bargain bin of, again, probably Electronics Boutique. It must have been about 10 quid, which my mum, bless her, was like, right, okay, that you can have that because it's 10 quid, not the 60 odd quid that games normally cost. And it was... Yeah, I've never seen the film. To this day, I've never seen the film. I don't think I can because I'm so disappointed in the game. It was PageMaster, the Macaulay Culkin film. And I was really into platforming games at the time. Obviously, I played through Super Mario World, and I had the Super Mario All-Stars, etc., etc. So looking at the back of the box, I was like, okay, this is just, standard platform fare. It is so brutally difficult. It has no save features, no continues, and there is no checkpointing. So if you take a hit throughout any level, it's just straight back to the start, and it's like 3 lives. So I never saw more than 2, maybe 3 levels in the entire game, and it wasn't good anyway. Let's be honest, it was the PageMaster. But I just couldn't... I think that was one of the first times that I could probably articulate how disappointed a game made me and how easy it would have been to fix the issue, especially considering it was obviously a game of a film that was aimed at a certain age range, and I just couldn't understand how they would mess that up. So
you're not going to believe this.
No.
We interviewed the guy who programmed it for the Mega Drive last week.
That's incredible.
Get him back on the phone. Someone wants him on.
Get him here right now.
That's brilliant. You know what? I was like, when you said, I don't tend to cover the SNES, I was like, that's because the SNES is brilliant. And then you start thinking of all these, these games.
There's a lot of them licensed games though, wasn't it? It's like, it just felt like, they could put out a really lame game. And often I think they were just kind of games that were maybe already designed and they just kind of slapped the branding on and changed the characters a little bit often.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of that. I think it was also just platform games were the easiest thing to make at the time, and it was certainly, it showed them up for what they were when you were getting stuff again like Super Mario World. It was just like nothing else, and that was one of the first games out on the SNES. So really, you've got your checkpoint at a very high level from the off, and then you release something that's mediocre, and it's just. Yeah. It's just incredibly disappointing. But then I think that the downside to that is there was a lot of games that were, if not classic, were really good that ended up just kind of being swept under the carpet because everyone was like, I can't be bothered buying yet another platformer that's probably not very good. So
burnt too many times.
Yes, exactly.
Well, have you always been into gaming, or did you ever like take a break and rediscover it? And have you always been into kind of like retro gaming? How did that kind of work then, your passion for the old stuff?
Yeah, I've just kind of never stopped really. Ever since I honestly can't remember a time where I wasn't playing something. And I never really segregate retro and modern gaming, to be honest. It's something that I always find strange when people have like a cutoff point and they say, I'm not playing any modern games. I'm only playing games that were released before 1989 and nothing else. I always find that a really strange attitude to have, because there's a lot of games released even now that have the same sentimentality, the same kind of structure, the same purpose as games that were being released then, but a lot of them might have more polish, or they attempt to do something different.
With the indie gaming scene probably more than ever,
Well, exactly that. So I don't really play a lot of what you'd call AAA, I guess. 90% of the stuff that I play that's modern is indie stuff, because it tends to have that heart of the arcade in a lot of it, and it was the arcade stuff that really got me hooked. Even on the Spectrum, the stuff that I played a lot of was the arcade ports, which some of them I tend to play the Spectrum version over the arcade version, which sounds insane, but I got so used to how it controls that going to the arcade version just felt wrong. So I guess the thing that really changed everything when I first got my PC way back when was discovering emulation. And once that happened, it's basically like opening a door that you've never seen in your house before, and there's suddenly a library behind it.
Yeah.
And look at all these books. so I've never really stopped since then.
So you mentioned emulation there, which leads nicely into the next question. What's your physical collection like? Do you have much original hardware, or do you mostly go with emulation? What's the
pretty much 100% emulation at this point. I have been for a while. I did. What tends to happen is I have a flight of fancy maybe every 5 years, and I go, you know what? I love playing these old games, and playing them on the original hardware will be fantastic. And then I buy the original hardware and I get the stuff, and I think, I can't really keep it out anywhere because that takes up a lot of space. So I'll put it in this cupboard over here, and then it goes in that cupboard over there. And I sit down and I think, what I'd like to do is play, let's think, Settlers on the Amiga. And I could drag that out and cable it all up and load up 18 discs to get to the menu screen. Or I could just go on GOG and buy it for £3 and just play it that way. And that tends to be what happens every time. And I end up selling everything back off again. So I just think I've kind of got past the necessity of having the actual hardware. And I completely understand why people want to do it. I think if I had the space to have it all there out and well, let's be honest, I would also need the money at this point because everything is just disproportionately expensive compared to when I first started out. But I think I would definitely need the space to just have it out and set up already in order to warrant owning it all.
What do you think about, because obviously we've kind of got a halfway point with the mini consoles, like we had the Spectrum came out recently, the A500 Mini. I mean, have you got any of those? What do you think of those?
So I did. I basically did the same thing with those. So I did have the NES Mini, the SNES Mini, the Mega Drive Mini, possibly another one. I can't remember now. So I had a few of them, and I did actually get quite a lot of use out of them. It was just at a point where I thought, I'm kind of just... The only real difference here is using the pads, and the pads obviously are really good recreations of the original. So I just thought, well, I could just get a sort of recreation USB pads just to carry on doing it the way I've always done it. So I just kind of ended up doing that. And then I bought the pads, and then I kept forgetting I had the pads and didn't use them. I was just using the same controller I use for everything. So I'm just useless, basically.
Good attempt, though. Well, let's get on to your YouTube channel, because, I mean, obviously, how long have you been uploading now? You said your channel was created in 2018. When did you put your first video out?
So the very first video went up 21st of August, 2019.
Right.
And that was, I think, created in about a day. That was Dizzy for the ZX Spectrum. So the very first Dizzy game. And it was a strange one because I can't. It's same with a lot of my early videos. I can't watch them because it makes my bumhole fall out with cringe. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to write videos. I didn't know how to edit videos. I didn't know how to do literally anything. But I just thought, well, learning on the job is probably the best way to do it. I mean, 90% of people who watch the channel now won't have ever seen it.
Yeah.
Because people just don't go back that far. It's unlisted now, but I don't private old videos off, because if people want to go back there, they can go and find them through playlists, etc. And that's absolutely fine. I think it's good, really, for a channel to be able to show how far it's come from the start to the end. But I unlisted it because I don't want it to be the first impression of the channel, because it is so vastly different in terms of delivery and style. Just everything about it was just me kind of just working out how to do this. And you can kind of tell by how quickly the videos came, because I think in the space of a week, I'd put together about 5 videos, because I was just addicted to this new thing that I'd discovered. So, it's been a good 5 years now.
What inspired you to start doing it then? I mean, do you remember making that first video, kind of why you wanted to do it?
Yeah, there was a few different reasons, but I think the main catalyst behind it was just I wanted to do something comedy-wise, and I don't think there's a great deal of comedy game channels, full stop. There are a lot of them, but the other thing is I don't think there's a lot that are non-American, is probably the easiest way to put it. So a lot of the big names, obviously AVGN being the kind of the spark that they all came from, they all focus in on the same kind of systems, really. So NES, SNES, etc., etc., etc. But I couldn't, when I did a very brief search when I was looking around, I couldn't find an awful lot that were doing the same thing, but for stuff like the Spectrum. And then on top of that, certainly the stuff that I was thinking of talking about, which was just bargain bin stuff that I ended up playing decades
You're not
prior.
doing Jet Set Willy, you're doing the budget games,
Yeah. So I do, every now and then I'll get one out of the archive that is a classic, but only if I've got something different to say about it, I guess, because the last thing I would want to do is put out yet another video explaining why you should play a game that you've already played.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people who are going to come across a video, probably not for the ZX Spectrum, who've never experienced a Spectrum and go, I'm going to play this game, Pud, for example. No one's searching on the internet for a review of Pud on the ZX Spectrum. So, it was just kind of, it was more of a platform for what can I make funny. And the ZX Spectrum is a pretty funny console. Computer even. Sorry, everyone. I'm getting told off for that. So yeah, it was a platform, and it didn't really take long until I changed it up with the Bad Influence look back. I think that was only about 6 months after I'd started, because I thought if I just carry on doing this one subject, it'll wear me out. So the channel's always kind of had like a two-direction that's kind of expanded from there.
Well, funny you mentioned the bad influence commentary there. You also do commentary over the GamesMaster episodes as well. Where did that idea come from? Because that's quite unique.
So the bad influence one was where I wanted to start off, because the bad influence was the one that I watched more. It was about the right age for me, whereas GamesMaster was, while I watched it, I know for a fact I didn't catch all of the phallic references throughout. So I was certainly not of a certain age at the time to watch it. And so I thought, well, I'll start with Bad Influence because that's the one I specifically remember watching. And I think I watched one episode of it and it just made me laugh, just sat there watching it because it was so forward looking and excited for the future, but in such a very, very CITV way that it just, there was just something about, I think seeing Andy Crane there as well. Andy Crane is just like an angel sent from heaven who can do no wrong. There's just something about him. I think I described him as the world's oldest teenager in the very first scene.
With his baseball cap on.
Yeah. There is just something about Andy Crane that he could just be on the screen for 2 seconds and it will make me laugh. So once I got through all of Bad Influence, obviously there was a lot of people watching that and a lot of them said, you've got to do GamesMaster next, you've got to do GamesMaster. And I thought, that's not really going to be possible because GamesMaster was a lot more humorous anyway. And to add a layer of humor onto humor just feels like adding chocolate spread onto a chocolate bar. It's a bit too much to swallow. So maybe a year or two ago, I just said, right, so I'll do a live stream and we'll watch like the first 1-2 episodes. And I think after one episode, I was crying with laughter because of just various things, whether it was the guests or just things people were saying that were just bizarre or the features. And I thought, you know what, maybe this does have a bit more material in it than I previously thought. So it was the perfect opportunity to jump on it and also to basically make longer videos that cover an entire series if possible, which helps when it comes to view time, etc. on YouTube.
That all-important algorithm.
Exactly. So it was the perfect opportunity, and I kind of did a second guess that it might do a bit better than Bad Influence, so I'd merged all of the Bad Influence videos together into a big marathon. And I put those out beforehand because I thought, well, if people come and see GamesMaster, they might go and have a look at the other stuff. And it worked exactly, by pure chance, it worked exactly as it intended. And people fell through to the Bad Influence again. So Bad Influence, even though I've been doing it since the start of the channel, it's had more views in the past 6 months than it ever had in the past 5 years, thanks to GamesMaster. So it's done well.
Yeah, it's funny. My brother, who is like, he's not into retro gaming or anything, but he actually said to me, because I've seen this guy who's covering Bad Influence. He remembered it from when we were kids.
Yeah.
So even like, the fact that my brother mentioned it, that kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, he's not into this space at all. But yeah, that's really cool.
Oh, amazing.
So yeah, I mean, I love those videos as well because I think, obviously at the time, you're right, because I watched both shows and Bad Influence definitely, the aim more at kind of the preteen kind of market. GamesMaster always felt like the show that your big brother would watch, much more credible. But then you do watch it, and when you do break it down, they had a lot of these kind of boy bands will come on who were just on the TV show circuit at the time promoting their new single, and Dominic had ripped them a little bit, but there was definitely a lot that you can make fun of. Looking back, it wasn't quite as cool as we remember. Yeah, in many ways.
Yeah, I think you could say that about everything, though. I mean, the time that you're living in right now looks normal to you right now, but in 20 years' time, look back and you'll find that it's looking pretty cringe. As is everything from back then. I do get quite a lot of accusations of not being old enough to have seen GamesMaster, I think because they don't quite understand that I don't hate the thing that I'm making fun of. I'm making fun of it because I've loved it and it's just funny to look back. Yeah, and I think I think that's nostalgia in general, though, because people can get quite defensive about the thing that they love, and they hold it on a pedestal, and maybe shining a light on how it actually was is quite eye-opening for some people.
Well, I mean, I was talking about that Xenon video before. I mean, you do have some, somewhat controversial opinions sometimes. Like, you don't like the Bitmap Brothers games.
I don't like the Bitmap Brothers games. I think it's probably because I wasn't massively exposed to the Amiga.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, the one that I do like the most, Speedball 2, I didn't play that on Amiga. I played that on a Mega Drive. So
right.
that was where I got my exposure to them. And then I remember everyone talking about Gods and how good Gods was. And I think a friend also had a SNES, and they had Gods on the SNES, and I lent it off them, and I hated absolutely everything about it. So I think I've just had this constant dislike of most of the Bitmap Brothers games. I mean, it looked great, but that is the case with pretty much all of the games.
I think even like, Magic Pockets, which is a game I went back to revisit in more recent years and really didn't enjoy playing it. But I remember as a kid, that it's got the Betty Boo music at the start, and it was just impressive hearing real music coming out of a computer. Yeah. So I guess in many ways it was that kind of polish that made the games probably seem better than they actually were.
Yeah. Well, it's Shadow of the Beast syndrome, isn't it?
So were there any games you thought were terrible at first, but then you grew to love them over time?
The one that's springing to mind mostly, not that I thought it was terrible, but that I just could not get anywhere with it or wrap my head around it, and I guess probably put it in the category of it's just another stupid Spectrum game that wants to kill me off as quickly as possible. And that would have been Green Beret, the port of Russian Attack. And I don't think I ever got off the first level growing up. It was a game that I used to always load up. There was obviously something about it that that ticked some box in my brain that made me want to play it, but I just didn't have the reflexes or control as a kid. And now, I would say 90% of the time when I go to just play a Spectrum game for the fun of it, it's generally always Green Beret. There is something about the instant action of it. Everything is simply laid out. It's not 100% fair because there is a lot of randomness in terms of which enemies are coming and where they're coming from. But there's something about being able to hit an enemy once and they instantly die, which sounds like such a simple thing, but a lot of Spectrum games weren't like that. A lot of Spectrum games had either a hidden health bar, you had to hit things 3 or 4 times, and there was no real feedback to it. And I think there's something about there's like a crunchy feedback to Green Beret that I probably did pick up on it as a kid, but didn't quite understand what it was that kept bringing me back. And once you get locked into a groove with it and you kind of know where you should be at specific parts of a level, and almost feels like a cakewalk at times, depending again on how the enemies generate into the level. But it's just one that I can't help but love. It's just so well put together. And the ingeniousness of, obviously, the Spectrum wasn't great at color, but the arcade original had 2 different colors for the enemies. One were I think they had a white headband and one had a red headband, and the red headband guys do a flying kick, so you have to jump and attack them. But Joffa couldn't do that for Green Beret on the Spectrum, so he made them skip, and it makes like a skipping noise as they come down the screen. So if I ever go and play the arcade original, it catches me out every time because I don't look for the color. I'm waiting for a skipping Russian to come running down the street.
To be fair, in real life, that would be scarier.
It would, yeah. And you would jump in the air and kick them in the face.
Well, let's talk about, I'm interested in, your process for making your videos, because you mentioned that, the original, your first video you did where you were just kind of figuring it out. I mean, what's your process like these days then? I mean, do you script your videos? What kind of gear do you use? How do you go about making it?
Yeah, so this 100% scripted because my brain wouldn't be able to, well, my mouth wouldn't be able to keep up with my brain, to be honest. I'd be trying to say about 3 sentences at once. I try and do that even with a script. So, yeah, it has to be scripted because I'm just useless at talking off the top of my head without stumbling. So what has changed really isn't necessarily the process, it is the methods of writing. So I used to write various things. I used to write music reviews and game reviews, etc., and done some basic freelance work way back in the day. And the biggest thing that I found probably for the first, say, 3 months or so is I was writing for a reader, but I wasn't writing for a speaker. So everything sounds, to me, I mean, a lot of people will go back and say, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't hear any difference. But to me, I can hear there is like a stiltedness to it, because a full stop is a full stop and a comma is a pause. And when you're reading, that's fine, because that's how your brain takes in. That's grammatically correct, basically. But you don't necessarily write like that when you're scripting, because you want it to flow like a natural conversation. And so the biggest change really was just I switched from writing like a writer to writing almost like a stream of consciousness a lot of the time. And then what I would tend to do is write it all out just as is. I'll go back through the footage and write things down as they come to me, and then I'll restructure it and make sure I basically have to read it out loud to myself like an absolute nutter in my front room on my own, and get it so that it sounds correct coming out of my mouth for the voice that I want to give the particular video. So that's the biggest change, really. The method of how I write for me reading it out, I would say. And then on top of that, it's just a gradual learning process, especially where the video editing's concerned, because that's obviously come on leaps and bounds after 5 years of doing this. So that's probably one of the biggest changes, is just learning so much about what I can actually do. And there's still tons that I have no idea. I basically make everything with sellotape and just stick it together and throw it out the door, and it seems to work. So
sounds quite a process, though. It's it must be quite a lengthy process to make the videos.
Yeah, so it's a difficult one, because Spectrum Games, you're talking for the vast majority maybe an hour or two to get through to the end. But when you get to something that's like a PC game, which I love to do the reviews on, but good Lord, is it a lot of work, because you've got, let's say, a 15-hour game to get through from start to end. That's if you're not having difficulty getting through it as well. But let's say 15 hours, and that's a relatively short game. But then that leaves me with 15 hours of footage that I have to sift through. So I have to annotate all of that footage and then use the annotations to write the script, and then tie the script back in with the annotations, and then obviously start the editing process then. So it could be 30 hours before I even get to the actual making a video segment, and then that can take 5+ days of solid work. So it's it's an undertaking, I'll put it that way.
So I've got a funny story for you.
Okay.
About 3 months ago, maybe 2 months ago, just not long before Christmas, I work till 10 in the evening quite often. I come home, everybody's asleep and stuff, and I remember lying on the couch eating a bowl of cereal on YouTube on my nice big, smart TV.
Yeah.
And Rose Tinted Spectrum comes up, and I saw a video on there of something I thought nobody else in the entire world had ever heard of, and I thought that I might have imagined it through the eyes of a dragon, which I thought was an absolute wonderful video. And obviously that is a lot of stuff you cover, these very strange oddity British kind of nostalgia things, and obviously the commentary on GamesMaster, etc. Where does that kind of like come from? Is it just like dug from your brain, or like, with the GamesMaster stuff, eventually it's going to run out? What would you do next, kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a bit of that. There's a bit of that mixed into it. There is always that thought of, it was the same with Bad Influence, really. I always thought, well, once that's finished, what am I going to do next? And I always have to try and think ahead on what the next thing is going to be. But I think the channel kind of, the focus kind of drifted. I did update the header on the channel last year when I started to do this shift to, it used to just say retro games, indie games, etc., etc. And now it's just, the tagline is just upsetting nostalgia, because that seemed to be what I was doing. It's just taking people's nostalgia and generally upsetting it in some way or another. And one of the things that kept sticking in my mind, and it's funny because a lot of the comments say the same thing, was I always remember seeing these things in school, but because of the way classes works, you would only ever see like 3 random episodes. You would never get a conclusion to what actually happened in the story.
Yeah.
It would just be, here's an episode of this thing, and the teachers would sneak out for a cigarette and then come back.
That's where we saw Through the Eyes of the Dragon. Yeah. and I remember ending on the, I forget the name of the bad guy. Who's terrifying for like a children's TV show. And I remember him turning up, and then that was it. Like, we never watched another episode of it. Yeah. And I always remember, did he turn up? Because I remember the girl holding up the scarf where she knits help into it. And that was just like buried in my brain. Mm-hmm. And I just saw it come up on your channel. I was like, oh my God. And
been having nightmares every night since.
Yeah. So, watching it, and it's a great video. And like you say, actually seeing what happened without having to sit there and actually watch this children's program from 35 years ago.
Exactly that. I think the thing with that, because my long-term memory is fantastic. My short-term memory is awful, but my long-term memory is great. So I've got just things in my head that I remember seeing once, and I think I'll have to go back and watch that to just even work out what on earth it was, but they just kind of left an impression. And Look and Read was kind of perfect for this, because obviously it started off with games and then went on to Bad Influence and GamesMaster, which were TV based on games. And then the Look and Read stuff fit into the nostalgia aspect, but also they also tend to heavily feature the BBC Micro, so they also kind of slotted into what I was doing, kind of. But the success of those, I think, is based on the fact that I have to produce a thumbnail that will just spark something in somebody's brain of, I recognize that and I can't remember why.
Yeah.
And then go and watch it, because a lot of people will have forgotten the name, like Through the Dragon's Eye or Badger Girl, etc., until it's there in front of them, and then it sparks that memory back off again. So yeah, it's nice to see the amount of people in the comments who are just like, I thought I was dreaming this. I cannot believe I've just stumbled across this video. So it's worked out perfectly, really.
Yeah, your channel does that so well. Like I said, there's kind of buried memories that just you bring back. So obviously I'll put a link to your channel in the show notes, Dave. If people haven't checked it out yet, I absolutely implore everyone to go and have a look, because like I said, you, like Joe did then, you'll watch one video, you'll just be binge watching it for the rest of the weekend. So what's coming up on the channel, and anything you're working on now you can tell us about?
Well, there is unfortunately the second half of GamesMaster Series 3 to get through.
Dexter Fletcher years.
The Dexter Fletcher years, in which the entire next half is all a tournament that never ends. So I do have that to deal with. I've got another Look and Read one that I'm going to line up for after this, and I think it's going to be Dark Towers, because there's a lot of people asking for it. It's not one that I ever saw, so that should be...
That rings a bell.
Yeah, it should be an interesting one. And then game-wise, it's one that I've only played a little bit of so far, but I'm going to be working through Bioforge on PC, which was... I don't think it was massively... I don't think it was a massive critical or commercial success, but that's kind of perfect fodder for my channel anyway. So, Bioforge on the PC. And all I can tell you about it is that there is a lot of reading in it, and it's faster to walk backwards than it is to walk forwards. That's basically all I've learned from the game so far.
That sounds frustrating already. Well, mate, keep up the good work. And thanks so much for coming on and geeking out with us for the last hour or so. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you.